66.
6640.
Your future lies in 6640.
66 books by 40 authors, and yet we now discover it's an integrated message system from outside our time domain.
Welcome to 6640, the ministry outreach of Koinonia House and Koinonia Institute. Today's Bible teacher is Chuck Missler, connecting the Bible to your life and the world around you. In today's study, Chuck continues his teaching on the book of Mark, chapter 9.
Peter's like many of us. He cannot yield in silence. The silence is an unbearable thing. It's interesting, many since Peter's day, by the way, have thought to honor Christ by giving special prominence to his servants, like Moses and Elijah, never realizing that in thus recognizing them as worthy of such homage, they have actually dishonored the Master himself. Christ is the issue, not Moses and Elijah. As venerated as they may be, they're footnotes. We've got the Messiah in front of us being transfigured here. And there was a cloud that overshadowed them. And a voice came out of the cloud saying, "This is my beloved Son. Hear him." When did that happen before? Anyone? At the baptism. Good for you. Exactly. At the baptism. And so the Father is interrupting Peter's suggestion, and he focuses their attention not on the vision that they're seeing, but on the Word of God. Hear him. That's what we should be focusing on here. Jesus is the ultimate expression of truth. And the vision itself is not an end of itself. It's a means of confirming the Word of God here. Now, Peter will make reference to this, by the way, in his second letter, in his last letter that he wrote. He makes mention of this experience, that he was there and they were eyewitnesses of his majesty. He's referring to the transfiguration experience. But then he points out that we now have the more sure word of prophecy. We have an experience that's even more vivid or provable or substantial than they had as eyewitness of seeing the transfiguration. What is that we have? The more sure word of prophecy. That's even more valuable than being an eyewitness. And that we expand on that whole idea, the more sure word of prophecy, in some briefings we've done, Beyond Coincidence and some others. And it's also included in our Hour 13 in our collection called Learn the Bible in 24 Hours. Hour 13 deals with the development of this very idea from Peter, what we mean by that prophecy is even more sure than being an eyewitness. But let's us move on here. And suddenly, when they had looked round about, they saw no man anymore, save Jesus only with themselves. So Moses and Elijah make this appearance, but then they apparently are on their way. And as they came down from the mountain, he, that's Jesus, charged them that they should tell no man what things they had seen, till the Son of Man were risen from the dead. So this was a confidential exposure, you see. The 3 men were not to tell the other 9. They're not, apparently, they tell no man. That includes the other disciples. They're supposed to keep this a secret. We don't know if they did. If they did, that might have contributed to some of the tensions we're going to see by the end of the chapter. Because you get to the end of the chapter, they're going to be arguing about who's going to be the greatest and so forth. There's some competition, some envy among them. And that could have been prompted maybe by these 3 having shared what happened. Guess what happened up on the hill, And they were told not to, see. For that very reason, probably. And they kept that saying with themselves, questioning one another what the rising from the dead should mean. Again and again and again, we notice in the Gospels that Jesus tells them he's going to be killed and rise from the dead, and they don't get it. They think maybe he's using an allegory or something. The only people that seemed to understand what was coming were the girls. The girls seemed to, some of the women were sensitive to what Jesus was saying. Now, this confusion is understandable. This idea of rising from the dead is a tough concept, even for you and I today. We talk about that, and it's a very vivid issue here. And they ask him, saying, "Why say the scribes that Elias must first come?" And he answered and told him, "Elias verily cometh first, and restoreth all things, and how it is written of the Son of Man that he must suffer many things and be set at naught." Now, there's a lot of confusion still today about this idea of Elijah. You see, they knew the prophecies from Malachi 3 but also Malachi 4, verse 5 and 6, the closing verses of what we call the Old Testament, in the way we organize it, indicates that Elijah is supposed to come and that before the Messiah appeared. It's interesting, though, Elijah appears here in the Transfiguration. So he has made an appearance before the cross, by the way. This very appearance would qualify. But Jesus goes on to say, I say unto you that Elias has indeed come, and they have done unto him whatsoever they listed, as it is written of him. And of course, he's alluding to John the Baptist in the role of the forerunner, if you will. That he was like a version of Elijah. He had prepared the way before him. And that's all in Luke chapter 1 and so on. Now, John denied that he was literally Elijah, but he could have fulfilled that role had they trusted him, but they didn't. So Elijah's still going to come, and I believe he's going to come in Revelation chapter 11, after verse 3 on. We'll talk about that here in a minute. There will be a future coming of Elijah, just as Malachi predicted, both here and in Matthew 17. And we think in Revelation chapter 11, verse 2 to 12, deals with the two witnesses. And I'm among those that believe Elijah is one of those two witnesses, and I'll show you why here in a minute. Now, these two witnesses are subject to, it's a kind of an important piece, so let's insert this here. In Revelation 11, verse 5 and 6 says, if any man will hurt them, fire proceedeth out of their mouth and devoureth their enemies. Wow. If any man will hurt them, he must in this manner be killed. These have the power to shut heaven, that it rain not in the days of their prophecy. And they have the power over the waters to turn them to blood, and to smite the earth with all plagues as often as they will. As you analyze this list of powers that the two witnesses have, you quickly discover they are unique to two people. Two of these powers are unique to Elijah. Two of these powers are unique to Moses. And so that's one of the reasons, that's probably the clearest reason why I think the identity of the two witnesses are forthright. It's interesting that there's an occasion in Luke 9 where James and John, the sons of thunder, they would have, if Jesus had let them, they would have duplicated Elijah's acts. We're going to call down fire on these guys. That's what they want to do. No. But I mean, they were ready. That was their mood, if you will. But Jesus rebuked them. Let's talk a little bit about these identities. There were three people expected. In John chapter 1, as it opened, there's a general expectation of either of Elijah or the Messiah or the prophet of Moses, Deuteronomy 18. And these Talmudic Messiah expectations are derived mostly from Malachi and elsewhere. Elijah, because that's the last words in the Old Testament, predicts that. And Moses was predicted, a prophet of Moses, in Deuteronomy 18. So these were three expectations that were extant in John chapter 1, Elijah, Moses, and the Messiah. And John the Baptist says, I'm not the Messiah, and he makes that declaration. Now, he didn't do all the things that Elijah was supposed to do. He did not turn the hearts of the children, as Malachi predicted, nor did he usher in the great and dreadful day, as Malachi. So that means that hasn't happened yet. That's the point that both John and I think I'm trying to make here. Well, there's a second issue about these two witnesses. It's interesting that there are two ministries in the Old Testament that were not allowed to finish. Moses was interrupted in Numbers 20 and Deuteronomy 3. And he didn't get to go in the Promised Land. In fact, his ministry was curtailed, if you will. Elijah also was incomplete. Study 1 Kings 17 and 19 and then 2 Kings 2. But the thing that is probably the most persuasive to me is that this is the third of reasons, of a list of reasons here. There are unique miraculous powers. There's four of them, two for each of them. Elijah, most people who analyze this all agree on Elijah because he didn't die and that sort of fixed that. He'd show up again. Because he called down fire from heaven in 1 Kings 18 and 2 Kings 1 and so forth. He also shut heaven for 3.5 years. Everybody is sensitive to the fact that he caused the drought to end by bringing rain. But you don't pick it up from the Old Testament record. But from the New Testament allusions to that, you pick up that not only did he bring the rain, he was the one that stopped the rain for 3.5 years, both in Luke 4 and in James 5. This is made a reference that he both shut the heavens, not just opened them. That's a subtlety, but and the reason it's so relevant, for how long did Elijah shut the heavens so it wouldn't rain? For 3.5 years. How long do the two witnesses show up? For the first half of the 70th week of Daniel, namely for 3.5 years. You see, it just too much ties together, for me at least, not to see that all tied together. Anyway, the other one, I think, is Moses. A lot of people disagree, but because he was the one that turned water into blood in Exodus 7, he's the one that had all kinds of plagues from Exodus 8 all the way to chapter 12. All the famous plagues were unique, distinctive, if you will, to Moses' ministry. So I think that's another reason I see them both as Moses and Elijah. Now, there's a contrast here with these two witnesses in contrast to the church. The church are supposed to be ministers. The ministers are to be harmless. Philippians 2, Romans 16, all makes reference to that. Well, what's the contradiction here? The rapture's already taken place by the time you get to the 70th week of Daniel, so the church is in heaven. So the unique instructions to the church are not operative here. These guys play rough. When their enemies give them a hard time, they call you. That should make a pretty exciting movie, wouldn't it? They could have some fun with that one, probably. But again, as I want to remind, James and John they were willing to try to duplicate Elijah's acts, but Jesus rebuked them in Luke 9. Well, there's a final reason why I don't think it was necessarily Enoch. Everybody likes to say, well, they always think the two witnesses, well, Elijah, they all agree because he didn't die. Neither did Enoch, okay? Well, then they argue from Hebrews 9:27, which says that it is appointed unto man once to die, and after this the judgment. And they use that as an argument that this must be Enoch. No. There are a number of people that didn't die once. Lazarus, Jairus' daughter, the widow of Nain's son, and so on. And so that rule, that expression in Hebrews 9:27 is a refutation of reincarnation. The general pattern is man he dies once, and then comes the judgment. There are exceptions. Lazarus, Jairus' daughter, Nain's being an example, and it's for that reason that I don't think Enoch's in the picture here for a number of reasons. I think he really represents the church, and for a number of reasons. Also, first of all, he's a Gentile. The witnesses are Jewish. That'll disturb a lot of our Jewish friends, but that's a suggestion I put on the table. I suspect that Enoch was a model of the rapture. He was removed before the judgment of Noah, and he wasn't pre-flood or mid-flood or post-flood. He was pre-flood, right? Okay. Anyway, he was born and translated on the 6th of Sivan, which is the same as the Feast of Shavuot, which is the Feast of Pentecost. And there's a whole study about that you can get into where we study the feasts of Moses. I won't take the time to get into all that here. See, I also tend to regard the Transfiguration as a staff meeting. Jesus and these two witnesses are having a discussion, an extended discussion about the second coming. They've talked about second coming, and that seems to be the allusion of Luke 9:31. Also, 1 Peter 1 and 2 Peter 1, both Peter was really impressed with that. It shows up. He makes allusions to it in his first letter and in his second letter. There you get the impression, the suggestive impression that they were talking about the second coming. Lying behind all of this is a mystery, and I don't have the answer to it. Why did Michael contend with Satan for the body of Moses? That allusion occurs in Jude 9. We know that God buried Moses in Deuteronomy 34, at the close of that. So Michael is apparently fighting with Satan over the body of Moses. Why is this? It's nowhere in the Bible. We don't know when it happened, why it happened, whatever. It apparently did happen because Jude makes reference to it. And so there must be something distinctive about the body of Moses. And it may have something to do with his being resurrected, not resurrected in the glorious body sense, but brought back to life like Lazarus or Nain and so forth. We use the term resurrection to imply our glorified body, which is coming at the rapture. The Old Testament saints aren't really resurrected in the true sense term until the second coming. What's going on here? Don't know. A lot of guesses. Well, as far as these two witnesses are concerned, there's other suggestions some have. Some think it's John the Apostle and the writer of the Gospel of John. But in the book of Revelation, he's instructed, thou must prophesy again. So some people think that they build on that, the possibility maybe John is one of the two witnesses. I don't think he is, for a lot of reasons. But anyway, we include the Apostle of John in the church, which is in heaven. John was expressly rebuked from desiring Elijah's acts. So I don't see John as one of the two witnesses. There's very few people I've come across that have. Others think it might be John the Baptist. Even J. Vernon McGee suggests that as a possibility. And that surprises me for a number of reasons, but be that as it may. Had the nation accepted John the Baptist's ministry, he would have served as Elijah that God sent. They would have also received Jesus. Instead, they rejected both of them and allowed them to be slain. So I don't think he's not my candidate for one of the two witnesses. But anyway, when they get down from this hill and this experience of the Transfiguration, they return to the other 9 apostles, or disciples, and they found them involved in a double problem. On the one hand, they found they were unable to deliver a boy from demonic control. That's going to be discussed here in a minute. And the scribes were taunting them because of their failure. So there's a double problem here. Why couldn't they deliver the boy from the demons? And the scribes, of course, were making capital of that. So let's get into verse 14, 15. And when he came to his disciples, he saw a great multitude about them, and the scribes questioning with him. And straightway all the people, when they beheld him, were greatly amazed, and running to him and saluted him when they see Christ coming. The crowd gathered, the scribes were stirring things up. Okay. And he asked the scribes, what question ye with them, or with them, or among yourselves? What's going on here? And one of the multitude answered and said, Master, I have brought unto thee my son, which hath a dumb spirit. Now that's an unusual thing. See, here's one that's not only demon-possessed, but the demon is keeping him from talking. And what's behind all of this, by the way, is that was the kind of spirits that the Jews couldn't deal with. Often a rabbi or someone would have a demonic thing, and they did have casting out of spirits. But the procedure was they first had the spirit identify himself. So if he had a demon that was making him dumb, not speaking, there wasn't any way to get him to identify himself, which apparently was a preliminary to exorcism that they were used to dealing with. And so anyway, this way I brought thee my son, which hath a dumb spirit. And wheresoever he taketh him, he teareth him. In other words, the demon is really messing the kid up. And he foameth and gnasheth with his teeth and pineth away. And I spake to thy disciples that they should cast him out, and they could not. Wow. He's both deaf and dumb, in other words. We get that not only from the verse 17, but it's going to allude again in verse 25. So the demon had this kid, so he was both deaf and dumb. And the demon was attempting to destroy the kid. Now I want you to think for a minute, can you imagine the father trying to take care of this kid? And unable to protect him. Can you imagine the anxiety here? Now, Jesus had given his disciples authority to cast out demons, yet their ministry had been ineffective. And that we found that back in Mark 6, and we'll see it a couple places. He answered them and said, O faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I suffer you? Bring him unto me. O faithless generation. There's an emotional cry from the heart of Christ here. Get an insight into his feelings here. How often Jesus must be grieved with us when we fail to use the spiritual resources he has so graciously given his people. He's frustrated with his disciples because they weren't able to do this. Can you imagine how he must feel about us and how ineffective we are? How that must grieve our king. And they brought him unto him, and when he saw him straightway, the spirit tear at him, and he fell on the ground, and he wallowed foaming. And he asked his father, as Jesus asked the father of the kid, how long is it ago since this came unto him? And he said, of a child. And oftentimes it hath cast him into the fire, and into the waters to destroy him. But if thou canst do anything, have compassion on us and help us. If. Ooh, there's an interesting word in there, isn't it? The Father was candid about his doubts. If thou canst do anything. Gosh, I sure hope so. But he's not sure, is he? Jesus said unto him, if thou canst believe, all things are possible to him that believeth. Boy, that's quite a statement. But this is one of the most abused statements in the Bible. People have ripped it out of context and made it a rationale for false confidence in personal wishes. Big difference. Some have taught that with enough faith, you can control God. In effect, you start giving God instructions. Who's in charge? Careful. Be careful with that. See, he's referring here to man-made, man-centered religion. If you think you can control God. No, you go before his throne boldly on the one hand because of Christ, but with still trembling. He's still God. He's an awesome God. And everything we request is subject to his will first. And straightway the father of the child cried out and said with tears, Lord, I believe. Help thou mine unbelief. Wow. Wow. I love the candor. He's candidly honest. Matthew adds a detail that he got on his knees. You can just picture that, can't you? Lord, I believe. Help thou mine unbelief. Luke adds that he was an only child. When Jesus saw the people come running together, he rebuked the foul spirit, saying unto him, Thou dumb and deaf spirit, I charge thee, come out of him and enter no more into him. Wow, that's the creator of the universe talking. God incarnate. And the spirit cried and rent him sore and came out of him. And he was as one dead, insomuch that many said, He is dead. But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. And when he was coming to the house, his disciples asked him privately, Why could not we cast him out? He said to them, This kind can come forth by nothing but by prayer and fasting. Wow. That's interesting. Prayer and fasting. That's not an Old Testament concept. That's a practical, spiritual toolbox. Prayer, fasting. That's a good question for all of us, huh? Carelessness. That's us, the neglect of prayer and fasting. Fasting is not an Old Testament concept to be abandoned in our times. With a little background, it is still an effective part of a serious spiritual person. Don't just fast without doing a little bit of homework. Get a little guide. God's Chosen Fast. It's a little book available in any Christian bookstore. There's a number of these little they're very simple, few things you should learn. You should do it cautiously. But it is a basic element in your spiritual toolbox. Prayer, of course, and fasting. The main lesson of this miracle is the power of faith to overcome the enemy. As you go back and review this and study it. Faith must be cultivated through spiritual discipline and devotion. And incidentally, I've been just recently quite taken with a verse in the International Standard Version Bible. In 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 5, it says, Add to your faith virtue, and to your virtue knowledge, and knowledge temperance, and to temperance patience, to patience godliness, and godliness to brotherly kindness, and to brotherly kindness charity. The sequence. Well, that doesn't grab you in the King James as well as it does in the New American Standard. I keep saying the International Standard, the ISV, International Standard Version. Add to your faith character, and add to your character knowledge. And the word virtue is sort of abstract to most of us. That isn't something we think can grab. Character nails it. You add to your faith character, then knowledge, the other things. That answers a troubling that's bothered me for 20 years. When I went from the corporate boardrooms, I spent 30 years in the corporate boardrooms, from there into professional Christianity, I put that in quotes. It's like going from a convent to a brothel. During the 30 years in the secular boardrooms, there were people with character. They may not have been saved, but they had character. You could rely on them. You could trust them. They understood the sanctity of a commitment. In the Christian professional world, 3 times in 30 years, 12 boards, we only had to remove an officer for breach of fiduciary duty only once, to my recollection. In the first 10 years of professional, we had to do it 3 times. Not bad people, just untrained. They have no grasp of this issue of character. Anyway, faith must be cultivated through spiritual discipline and devotion. So not only did their failure embarrass them, but it also robbed the Lord of glory and gave the enemy opportunity to criticize and blaspheme. It is our faith that glorifies God.
You've been listening to 6640, the ministry outreach of Koinonia House and Koinonia Institute. Today's Bible teacher was Chuck Missler, teaching through the book of Mark. Download the new K-House TV app to access an ever-growing collection of free resources. Visit the Apple or Android App Store, or search K-House TV on your Roku or Fire TV streaming device. Thank you for listening to 6640 and for your continued prayerful support of this ministry. Until next time, as we continue this series, may God bless you with the knowledge of His Son, Jesus Christ, as you study His Word.